Hey, we're back. Hope you're doing well. It is Sunday. Um, all the days are kind of running into each other. I don't know how it is with you, but now that we're all gone virtual online, it's kind of hard to keep track of the days. But anyway, today is Sunday, and I want to talk about TV westerns. Um, they were the foundation of early TV, especially in the 1950s, 1960s. And at one time, there was literally dozens of westerns on television. There were the dramatic 60-minute westerns that became iconic westerns, such as Gunsmoke and Batman. that's another that's another iconic show. I was going to say Bonanza. They're still rerunning the stuff to this day. Maybe you grew up, maybe you know these shows. You probably didn't grow up on them because I did. You didn't, but they're on reruns, endless reruns. Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, Wanted Dead or Alive. Now these westerns that were so popular in the 50s, they were cashing in on our the interest in movies that were westerns that were always been popular, and so you could make a, a western fairly inexpensive because you're filming outside a lot, and you had at the time new actors to the game, people like Steve McQueen, Richard Boone, and James Arness. They weren't stars yet, but television made them stars. And some of them went on to have careers in films, uh, like James Gardner and James Coburn, and of course, Steve McQueen, who started in a series called Wanted Dead or Alive, which was a spinoff of another series called Trackdown about a bounty hunter. But this bounty hunter wasn't a cold blooded killer. He had morals, and he usually brought his man in alive unless the guy gave him no choice. Anyway, these were inexpensive to film, and they're usually little quick morality plays of good and evil, pretty basic, um, and we couldn't get enough of them. The American audience was hungry for this type of nightly entertainment that was coming into their house now. You didn't have to go to the movie theaters to see these westerns, and and because the Old West wasn't that far removed from the 1950s or the 60s like it is now, we kind of looked at it like a recent history, and it kind of gave us a taste of what our great grandfathers lived through. Although most of the series were essentially melodramas with a lot of gunplay, which probably isn't accurate, but that's how the myth of the Western starts. Um, that's how a lot of myth starts, and then you try to see through the myth to see the truth. Uh, but in the 50s and 60s, you grew up on westerns. Everybody was in when we were kids. You're playing cowboys and Indians, good guys against bank guys, bank robbers, the sheriff. This was a major thing that children played, and we all wore little cowboy hats. We had plastic cowboy pistols and boots, and we couldn't get enough of it. Uh, it all came essentially crashing down to the end in the late 60s, um, because of the changing times in our country. Uh, we were looking for something else besides escape into the Old West, which was kind of comforting because our present was pretty dramatic and traumatic, starting with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and earlier than that with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The nuclear threat was a major reality and concern. Um, and so that you'd watch a Western that night and you kind of forget all about that. And our parents did too. It wasn't just for kids. And great series like Gunsmoke and Bonanza were on many years. Gunsmoke was I believe, the longest running Western, over 20 years, or right at 20. Bonanza was on about 14 years, but there was a lot of great ones in between that had great runs. There's series like The Virginian, starring James Dury, who actually recently passed away. These were 90-minute dramatic episodes, and they're really adult. It wasn't just about good and evil. They told complicated stories, just so happens to be set in the Old West. And we look forward to it every week to see the new episodes, just like we did with The Rifleman and Have Gun Will Travel. It was just, you couldn't wait for the next episode. And then we got bogged down with our assassinations and the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. And all of a sudden, kids my age were becoming concerned about getting drafted and having to go fight in Vietnam. And so you weren't so the Westerns weren't healing your issues. And so then you turn to more 70s contemporary television that had a more cynical tone to it, like All in the Family or MASH, and the Western is essentially dead. They kept trying to resurrect it every once in a while. They didn't really have much success. But why such a phenomenon in the day? Well, because we had just come out of World War II, and we looked to our past in television. We didn't see a lot of contemporary films dealing with returning veterans. And so we've kind of found a way to heal our mental wounds and our physical wounds from coming through World War II and the Korean War. And now we're in a Cold War with Russia, the Soviet Union. And so it was comforting to have a series like The Rifleman, which is a great father and son relationship series that you can watch in reruns now, and they still, in my opinion, they still hold up because the relationship between the father and son doesn't get any better than that. And but then when the real life intruded on our imaginations, the audience, like in film audiences, they changed. The audience had changed. It was no longer satisfied watching a simplistic morality tale of good and evil taking place. And it looked like it was old-fashioned, like with the Old West is old. What about what's going on now? And so then contemporary television changed drastically. And also during the 60s, we had, besides serious Westerns, we had kind of light Westerns that were good for a laugh, like Maverick was about con men, very popular. We had a series like Wild Wild West. Maybe you know it. Robert Conrad, who starred in that, just recently died this year. James West was a secret agent, not different than James Bond. In fact, that series was based on our new infatuation with spy movies. James Bond was hugely popular, and so someone came up with the really smart idea of setting James Bond in the Old West. And he had access to technology and stuff that they did not have access to in real life, folks. But so we knew it was fantasy, and it was just not to take it serious. And it was like watching an episode of James Bond on horseback. And it was hugely popular and very action-oriented, lots of physical stunts. People still wanted to see that. And then there were series like Rawhide that made stars out of Clint Eastwood. It was his first series, and it's essentially based on the film by Howard Hawks, The Red River, about an endless cattle drive. And Clint Eastwood was not the lead in it, but he was the second lead. And he became so popular in that series that they made him an offer to go make some movies in Spain with Italian filmmakers, and he made these on the cheap, and he made a series of them, a few dollars, fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and they ended up calling them spaghetti westerns because they were Italian movies done by Italian filmmakers, and most of the cast is Italian, but they were filmed in Spain because Spain still had wide open plains. Italy doesn't, and so it kind of looked like the Old West. So if you watch those films, it does not really look like our West, but it's close enough. And he came back after a couple of years over there, and he came back and he made a couple what you would call spaghetti westerns in America, Hang 'em High, Joe Kidd, and now it established him as an international movie star. And then he stopped making westerns and went into Dirty Harry, and the rest is history. And Clint started in TV westerns. Steve McQueen was another one who was a very, very huge action star. I don't know who you could compare him to today. Whatever action stars you might like, Steve McQueen has almost created what they would call the cool action star. He had done the series about a bounty hunter who was fair and fair. He treated as he just wasn't bringing everybody in dead or alive, although that was the name of the series, Dead or Alive. He mostly brought them alive, but nobody liked bounty hunters in the Old West because they're selling people essentially. And so he has a profession that was needed, but it was looked down at. It's just like he was like the Old West version of Dog, the bounty hunter, and maybe you love him. His wife, I know, just recently passed away, but Dog will recover to go get bad guys again. Anyway, Steve McQueen, during the middle of this, he made a couple films. He made a film in Reading, actually. You should check it out. It's an excellent film, directed by the excellent B-movie director, Don Siegel, who started in the 50s, directing Ride on Cell Block 11, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Later on, he directed Dirty Harry, and he directed Clint Eastwood in several films, not just westerns. He did do a couple westerns with him, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, and he directed. They made this movie here in Reading. It was a World War II film called The Hell with Heroes, and Reading, and this is about 1962 or so, was flooded with actual movie stars. Like Steve McQueen was here, James Coburn, Bob Newhart was here, Harry Guardino, Fess Parker. This was quite a thing for Reading. They filmed this World War II movie down in Cottonwood, and you should check it out. It's really an excellent film, and you wouldn't know it was filmed in Cottonwood, but was substituting for Europe. And because I read Don Siegel's biography, he said when he filmed the movie, he goes, in a place called Redding, California, he goes, it was the hottest summer I've ever experienced in my life. And they had to be they had coats, and they had to be like it was in winter, and it was 110 degrees every day. That's all he remembers about it, how hot he was. And I go, well, there's Redding for you. Anyway, filmed here in Cottonwood, of all places, and on this ranch, which is turned into it's a gated community. I'm trying to Lake California, I think they call it now. That's where they filmed. That used to be just bottom land. So maybe you guys live out there. Maybe you know somebody there. They filmed this movie. Hell's to Heroes out there, and so Reading goes down in some history. But in the meantime, westerns were the complete popular. It's hard to explain how popular they were. It's almost like Game of Thrones type of popular. All the kids wanted to be cowboys. Everybody wanted horses. I wanted a horse because we just loved the look of it, and you're riding on the range, shooting people. It looked fun. Anyway, But what was going on is we're looking at our own myth. And it's important to realize that the myth was a lie. The Old West wasn't like that. But we wanted it to be like that. And like most Hollywood, it's not. They're not documentaries. They take a historical moment, um, and they spin their web on it um, of how we wished it was. And then later on, when we found out the historical accuracy of it, how we um, messed over the land with gold rushes, and how we mistreated the Native Americans, it's really a sad point in our history. Anyway, the series is hugely popular, um, but things changed in the late 60s. The hippie movement hit, rock and roll hit, and the kids that were playing in the backyard, cowboys and Indians or cowboys and bank robbers, put down the guns and they started smoking pot and listening to Jimi Hendrix. That's a fact, folks. And they didn't feel like they wanted to be cowboys anymore, because they kind of realized it was a myth and it was a lie. And so the last of those series, like Bonanza, went off the air in 72, 73, Gunsmoke. They just lost their audience because of the changing times. Um, in the 80s, there's been some half-hearted attempts to bring back the Western. I know in the 90s, when I lived down in Santa Fe, they were filming The Young Riders. It was a series about Pony Express riders, and I think it was on for about 3 years. Not a bad series. They filmed it mostly in Arizona. But many and many of my actor friends in Santa Fe got jobs on it. And it was a last gasp, I should say, effort to kind of resurrect the Western later on. And even in films, had lost their place. Clint Eastwood had a revivalist, revisionist history Western called Unforgiven that was pretty popular, but it didn't. There wasn't an onslaught of Westerns being made now. Kids, younger generation, who were raised on Star Trek and Star Wars, wanted space. And so, actually, if you look at most space shows, whatever they are, they're essentially Westerns set in outer space. Star Wars, very much so. Darth Vader's the bad guy who's going to steal your land, and Luke is going to fight off the bad guys. They're essentially melodramas set in outer space, which were essentially Westerns. And that, and so the generation below me grew up on that, and that is their touchstone, which is sci-fi, which didn't have that huge of an influence on TV. I mean, there was Star Trek, Lost in Space was kind of like a tongue-in-cheek sci-fi. There was a few sci-fi efforts, but nothing like the Westerns. They had just become, they lived out their time, they just become irrelevant. But in the middle 2000s, they resurrected the Western on HBO, an excellent Western called Deadwood, based more on historical fact. Maybe you've seen it. It was on for, I think, 2 years, and suddenly went off the air. It might have been on 3 years. It was really a work of staggering originality, and about a real town, a gold rush town in the Black Hills of Wyoming, South Dakota, and those areas, where for a time there was a huge gold rush, and it's historically accurate. So they tried to use real people's name in it. They have people that were actually alive in those days, like Calamity Jane, and Buffalo Bill and Wild Bill Hickok and the like. So they try to use more historical accuracy. And it's really an excellent show. Please, if you get a chance to watch it, please do. Deadwood. And then about a year ago, they did a movie. I haven't seen it yet because I don't have the HBO, but I heard good things about the movie and want to watch it. The sad thing about it, maybe you've seen the TV movie Deadwood. The guy who created it all and wrote all the scripts now has come down with Alzheimer's. And that's it for him. He won't want to be doing any more. And this is a guy who produced, had a great run of hits from Hill Street Blues to Deadwood to many, many others. And he also did an incredible original series called John from Cincinnati, which I just adore, but only lasted one season. He is monumentous when it comes to taking a genre like a police procedure or a Western and turning it on its head in an original way. And if you've seen Deadwood, they have very heightened language. It's not realistic language, not really people don't talk. What they do in Deadwood, it's almost, I hate to say it, Shakespearean, but there's a lot of four-letter words too, which no matter how many Westerns you've seen, you don't hear cowboys cussing. Not with F-bombs and kind of street jargon, but he researched it all. He said they did talk that way. We just kept it out of the public for kids. And so Deadwood is a great example of how the Western still could live in more of a realistic manner. And it was dealing with things that were relevant to the culture, our rape of the Indian lands, greed, the greed that men do, what it drives men to do. For greed, it's almost like the Silicon Valley, Wall Street greed, except for it was a gold mine and it was for real. And it's an excellent show. So what I want you guys to do, if you can, I'm going to post some stuff on your assignment. Try to seek out one of these episodes, and a Deadwood episode would be most excellent. They're brand new. It's hip. It's happening. They use a lot of F words, and there's a lot of brutal violence. So you might dig it if you haven't dug it already. And let's write an essay on that. But if you want to go back in historical time and write an essay about Gunsmoke or the Rifleman, these things are mostly on YouTube, but I will post a list of this stuff. And the paper won't be due for another week, so don't worry about it yet. So seek it out and try to enjoy the Western. Do you like Westerns? Do you avoid them? Do they mean anything to you at all? Or do they have any pull on you at all? My dream, because I made a couple of films that nobody ever seen or heard of. I always wanted to make a film noir Western. Remember how we we didn't talk about this class, but my film class, film noir, it's what they call black film with black and white photography, and it usually involves some shady characters and a femme fatale. I always wanted to do, I've never seen a Western do that. And I always wanted to do like a low budget Western, my version of a film noir, but in the West. I still would love to do that one day. We'll see if I have time. Anyway, I hope you guys are hanging in there. I hope we're getting through this. We've got another about 4 weeks of class. So this will be another assignment, and then you'll have your another assignment. The last thing you're going to do is a research paper based on anything you want in television. And I'm going to let you come up with the topic. And it's going to be a research paper. It's going to be worth 20 points. It's 3 to 5 pages. It's not the typical essay, because it's going to incorporate the last 2 essays into one. That's why it's worth double the points. And I will make a list of stuff, but you can write about anything to do with television, contemporary television. You can write about Friends episode or whatever you're watching right now, Game of Thrones. I know we haven't got there yet. We've got another month for me to get us up to speed as much as I can. But to have a historical context of where something like the Game of Thrones stands on the shoulders of these other series, is it's important to know the other series, where it comes from, and finally connect the dots. And also, even in Game of Thrones, you have to look at what's going on in the culture. Why was that such a phenomenon? There's a reason for that, folks. The power structures have changed in the world. Everything's changed. And Game of Thrones has all those ingredients, if that's your cup of tea. And so a lot of series are reflecting on what's going on in the culture. Remember, these Westerns were reflecting on what was going on in the culture, even though it was the culture of 50 years before. People were 10 years old watching Westerns in the 60s. But my parents loved it too. They're a different generation. There is a reason for it. And the reasons are usually the fact that we were still hopeful and naive, and we believed in something other than desperation. And then the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, Vietnam War, civil rights, slapped the reality in our faces, just like reality is being slapped in our faces now with this pandemic. We're no longer innocent. We're no longer hopefully we have hope. But it's hard. It's sometimes it's helplessly hoping because we're doing our best. So don't rush into it, folks. Don't rush into. Don't go to the beach yet. Keep washing your hands. Keeping your distance from each other. This thing will pass eventually, and hopefully, this time next year we'll be having beers together at the Squire Room. Anyway, if they ever open it again. So on that happy note, please seek these Westerns out. I will make a list of them on assignments. Look for it. I won't post that till tomorrow. Anyway, this has been Contemporary Television, The Western. Hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.